the Leave It Human programme, as you'll see if you've looked in the pack, the members of that programme all have quite varied backgrounds, so we cross the social sciences, but we're very aware that in this room today, we're even more interdisciplinary. We've got a very broad church of people in this room. And one way of reflecting that was in thinking about organising this panel. So the idea of this really is to give some time and space to people who might consider that making science public is almost part of their day job, if you like. So lots of us are involved in critiquing and engaged in some of the theoretical debates. And the people I'm going to introduce, as I say, I'll let them speak for themselves, but I guess part of their day job they might consider to be making science public. So these were some of the aims we'd ask people to speak to, which would be why make science public in the first place, which is obviously a kind of highly controversial topical question. Who makes science public? So we have maybe some examples here. And how is science made public? And I guess as part of the Leave It Human programme, we've got several questions that link to these, including maybe the idea of whether or not the way science communication is done or perceived has maybe changed over time. But I'm not going to say anything more about that now. I'll wait, and that might be an issue we can come to in questions or might be picked up by some of the people on our panel. So that's all I've got to say. If we can start with Samantha Tang, who's going to come up and talk to you, and we're trying to have about 5 minutes per presentation and lots of time for discussion. So thank you.
She's very hard.
Yeah,
I am, yes.
Well, literally just say like 5 minutes after I'll
Excellent.
go off. Hi, don't worry, it's not death by PowerPoint. My name's Sam. I'm from the School of Chemistry. Well, I'll flip reverse the order of the questions. So who I am a chemist by training, and back in 2004 my job post was created using Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council money, back in the day when they had money, to promote science. And so several academics, you might have heard of Martin Polyakov, Mike George, Steve Howdell, Pete Licence, Mike Healy, they all put this grant in, and they wanted someone who would be a postdoc in a research group, but instead of doing any research, their role would be to facilitate the communication of science. So they would develop new projects to kind of promote the chemistry that went on in the school, but also take over the running of existing projects that was going on in the School of Chemistry. I'm on a really creaky floorboard there. It's really quite light. Sorry. So yes, so the deal was that I started my job there. I took over some of the projects like school science fairs and career talks, all the stuff that other universities right the way across the UK, right the way across the world do. And over that time, there was a remit obviously for the research councils of various projects I had to instigate. Some worked and some didn't, but in general I'm extremely lucky because I get to interact with a range of audiences, whether they're primary school children coming in, freezing things in liquid nitrogen, smashing it up, whether it's going out to secondary schools, colleges, talking about potential careers, talking about the research that we do, that sort of thing. But also it's not necessarily just me that delivers the activities. The idea is I facilitate it so that more staff and more students go out and communicate the science. For us, it's important that whether it's members of the public or whether it's school children, they get to meet the scientists that do the work. They get to interact with them, find out what is it that drives their passion, drives their enthusiasm for doing the work that they do. It's raising aspirations, it's all those wonderful buzzwords, public engagement, that sort of thing. Who I am. Okay, we've done that. Why we do it, kind of. How, that's kind of it, really, I suppose. So just, I don't really know what else to say. I guess that's pretty much 5 minutes, isn't it? But yeah, basically, feel free to ask questions. I can't necessarily answer it in a social science context because I've got none of that in my background. But if it's to do with chemistry, I'll try my best to answer it. Okay. Thank you.
My name's Brady Haran. I used to work for the BBC as a video journalist, and then in my spare time I started a project here at the University of Nottingham which was called Test Tube, and it's still going. And that's part of the website there in the top left corner, and that was all about showing science as it really is, as opposed to what it looks like on TV or in the media and whatnot. I wanted to sort of do a more honest depiction of those moments, like when things don't work and when your grant gets rejected and things like that, as well as all the good things about being a scientist. That project was quite successful and continues to be, and as a result of my interacting with lots of scientists, other opportunities and ideas started bubbling away, and the next one I started working on, all of these are still going, by the way, so I won't keep saying I started this and it's still going, you can just assume they're all still going. The next one was called Periodic Table of Videos, which was a bunch of videos about all the elements on the periodic table. Like, so if you go to that website and click on hydrogen, up pops a video about hydrogen and whatnot, and those videos were also very successful, and it's become much bigger than just the periodic table now. It's chemistry in general, but we still love our elements. And that was going so very well that the School of Physics here at the university thought maybe we should try something else, and that resulted, there is no periodic table for physics unfortunately, so we just made one up. That's what 60 Symbols was, which was basically talking about whatever we fancy talking about in physics and astronomy, and then loosely attaching it to a symbol. We've now done something like 180 of those videos. We were only going to do 60 at the start, but we're stuck with the name, so there you go. And then, as a result of all these excellent collaborations with the university here, and there are a few other ones I haven't mentioned to do with food science, and also a few humanities ones as well to do with theology and languages, I started going a bit further afield. I've worked with other universities on some projects, other institutions and organisations such as the Science Technology Facilities Council, which was Backstage Science, where they basically just opened the doors to all their fabulous facilities around the country, and I could just go inside and ask questions and make videos in kind of my style as well. And then YouTube and Google itself started taking such an interest in the successes we were having here that they asked me to come up with a few other things that I'd like to do, which they have funded. So that has included Numberphile, all about numbers and mathematics and things, and Deep Sky Videos, all about astronomy, travelling around the world to telescopes and places like that. Altogether, these videos that I've made with the university here and with others, I think there's 1,600 videos have been made in the last 4 or 5 years. They've been watched 87 million times. They're all hosted on YouTube, of course, and then played through these websites as well. We've had something like 450,000 comments from viewers, and it seems like just as many emails from people coming into my inbox every day. People are really engaged with these videos. They're shown by teachers in schools, they're watched by people every night. We get fan mail and autograph requests, and we have people in the videos like Sam and other people, some people in this room who get recognised in the street when they're walking around now as you're the person in those YouTube videos. Why I do it is because I find science really interesting, and I love telling stories because I'm a journalist, and this is brilliant. I can tell whatever stories I want without a boss in a newsroom telling me what to do. And the reasons for the scientists doing it with me are probably many and varied. You have to ask them. I'm sure you can guess what a lot of them are. I think everyone has a different reason, but I think the main reason is everyone just loves doing it and loves talking about science and loves it when there's an audience watching it as well. And I'm happy to answer questions and look forward to talking more about what everyone else thinks as well. Cheers.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Richard Holliman.
Okay, so my perspective on this is slightly different from Samantha's and Brady's, in that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of research we've been doing, but I'm going to answer the same questions, so hopefully it's useful all the same. If you are interested in any of the things that I talk about here, the paper at the bottom is one that we published theoretically in 2014, but it's actually already out. It's one of the wonders of the web, I suppose, which talks about some of these ideas. Oh, sorry, I should go back there, sorry. Let's go back. Sorry, I should say, the big kind of question I'm interested in, so the project is called Making Science Public, obviously, and I'm interested in whether the example I'm going to give you here is whether it's an example of making public science. So I'm going to talk a little bit about online citizen science. Obviously, online citizen science comes in a number of different forms, and I'll tell you about the one which I'm going to talk about. So okay, here's a quote from Francois Guay, who's at UCL, heads up the Citizen Cyber Science Centre down there, and he talks about this as a growing trend where ordinary people, we can argue about what ordinary people are, but how they use their computers and the World Wide Web to contribute in meaningful ways to an increasingly wide range of scientific and research challenges. So it's not obviously limited just to science, but nevertheless it is about digital technology and how we use that in meaningful ways. Okay, so the example I'm going to talk about just quickly is called Fold It, and we've been researching this as a multiplayer scientific discovery game, which is one of our kind of types of citizen science. And the basic idea of the game is to elucidate three-dimensional protein structure of protein modules. And what people are trying to do is to find the, in quotes, natural configuration. So how would it work in your body, essentially? And that tends to be done through the least amount of energy. And crucially, the idea of this citizen science project is to see whether humans can actually outperform computers. Okay, so you can write algorithms to do this, but actually, can humans, working at their own computers, to configure these protein molecules, do it better than computers? And if they can, you can use that data to then write better algorithms. That's kind of it in a nutshell. So down here, I've just highlighted a little box down here. The web page there is from last night. But the little box there just gives you some idea of the type of people, the who, if you like, of people who are actually using this. And people self-organize themselves into teams. You can play individually, you can play in groups, you can take on different tasks. And these are then scored. So there's a kind of competitive element to this as well. So people want to be top of the tree. Okay, so I'll just briefly highlight a couple of points here around the who, the why, and the how. So essentially, you can split this into two processes. There's a development phase, how do you put this citizen science game together, and then how do you run it effectively down the bottom. So those are the kind of two phases. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of points, and then I'll move on. So at the top, the how, in my opinion, kind of leads everything else, okay? So there's two bullet points listed there. One is the Rosetta at home, okay? So there's a point there about where we are in terms of using digital technologies, okay? So all this project was developed out of a previous project, okay? So this is an iteration of a previous project. So there's an emphasis, I think, in a lot of the talk about online citizen science about the new. Everything's new, everything's new, everything's new. Actually, we know quite a lot about what we've done in the past, so we can learn from that. And the second one is the participatory design. So Ulrika talked a little bit this morning about embedding public engagement within cycles of research. And through participatory design, we can conceptualize research with all these people over here, the who. Yeah, so it's not just about scientists, it's not just about biochemists, it's about computer scientists. Interestingly, if you do any research in this area, it's certainly about graphic design. People really care about the look and feel of these things more passionately than you would think. And of course, it's all about the people who are going to use it. So you can actually embed them in the process. The public engagement starts when you conceptualize the project, and then it works through the cycles. And if it works well, and they get involved, it works here as well. So in this example, the game didn't stop when it was launched in 2008. It's evolved with all these different people involved as well. And the only other point I just want to make quickly is around once you get the game out there, and it works effectively because you've checked that it works effectively and it's useful for the people who want to use it, then it becomes a kind of self-organizing. In this particular example, it's almost like a production line where people take on particular roles. This is all voluntary. Nobody's assigned a role. They take them on. So you find people sharing strategies, scripting code, sharing those codes with other people, so other people take them on, work in games, develop them. They're called evolvers. Yeah? They've even got their own identity online. They support new players as they're coming in because it's quite a difficult game to play, and they discuss this in forums. But the crucial thing is very much task-focused. If you look at the column here, what do people actually want to do? Effectively, on the top of the list, the thing that they tell you they really want to do is contribute to science. Yeah? So they're task-focused. That's actually what they want to do. But all the other things kind of come in there as well. They want an intellectual challenge, so the tasks have to be small enough so they can do them in their spare time. So they some of them compare it to a Sudoku puzzle. Can I do it in 20 minutes over a cup of tea and a cigarette? Yeah? Community is obviously important. Having the knowledge that this is useful knowledge and can be used in medical research, and then the competitive element came out the bottom. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. And I invite Dr. Sujatha Raman, who's Deputy Director of the programme, who I think has a few slides. Is that right?
Yeah, that's fine, thanks. Thanks, Prue. I'd like to preface my remarks by drawing a little bit of a contrast with the bulk of what we talked about this morning. Sorry, let me just start this. The bulk of what we talked about this morning, probably right until Warren's presentation. So we spent a fair bit of time talking about making science public and what that might mean and what it involves, but largely as an exercise from above. So in other words, how our governments, the European Commission, maybe research councils, individual research projects, how do they conceive of this project of making science public, perhaps through these invited forums of public engagement and so forth. The purpose of this panel was very much to devote some attention to try and think about making science public and what that might mean if we look at it from below. So from the practice of making science public. And in many ways, I'm a bit of an interloper in this session, because unlike my colleagues, especially Samantha and Brady, I haven't actually done the kind of public engagement that you've been talking about. But certainly over the life of the program, hope to become more involved, responding to some of the questions I think that Alice Bell, for example, raised, which are very important for a program like this. And I think Roland Jackson asked us a similar kind of set of questions. So in other words, the practice of making science public by participating in public debate, in political debate, and it's certainly something that over the life of the program, some of us hope to do. But what I want to do in the next 3 minutes or so is to try and reflect a little bit on how this issue of making science public, how does it make sense? How do we understand the who, what, why questions that we raised earlier? If we start paying some attention to what exactly is made public, when we start looking at this whole domain of public engagement and different forms, invited, uninvited. So in the morning we talked, Brigitte, for example, mentioned opening up databases, for example, as one notion, this idea of transparency and openness in policy making. Maybe there's ways in which research, the opening up of research findings, making them public, producing evidence for policy making, and making them bear on political debates, on policy debates. These are all some of the things that have come up in the course of the discussion so far. But what I want to sort of draw your attention to is there are other ways in which one can think of the way in which the content of what is made public in these kinds of domains. So again, to draw a contrast with what Warren said this morning. So Warren talked about how the public meaning of climate change is primarily, or one of them at least, is primarily something quite mundane. It's to do with the weather, rather than the kind of complexity of climate change as a bigger problem. But if you look at other forms of public action, activism, civil society movements, and so forth, it's quite interesting to see that there are some ways in which the complexity of the science is being engaged with. And to some extent, maybe what Rick just talked about is one example of that, of citizens kind of engaging, if you like, in cyber science. But the three examples that I want to highlight in the next minute or so. The first is asking questions about how is research governed? So, for example, funding practices. The second one is what actually happens when science is translated into practice. So this might be in a policy context, it might be in a technological context, so scientific research being translated, if you like, into technological applications. What happens in that context? A number of questions being raised. And then finally, not to forget that there are ways in which some of the tacit assumptions within science itself, within the complexity of scientific knowledge, are sometimes made evident from below, or sometimes made more public. for greater debate, greater scrutiny, sometimes with problematic results, and maybe we can talk about that. But let me just give you 3 examples to highlight the sorts of things I'm talking about. So if you look at the whole issue of making research governance public, what's interesting here is we have an example of scientists not so much talking about research findings or engaging, doing public engagement in the sense of talking about their particular projects or the scientific knowledge they produce, but about the system of research funding. So many of you will be aware of this exercise, as Pallab Ghosh summarizes it here. Scientists have delivered a coffin, this was in May of last year, a coffin to Downing Street on Tuesday to protest the death of British science, and basically talking about the emphasis on kind of impact-driven, commercially driven, application-driven research as opposed to basic research. James Wilsden, I think, was supposed to be here, but he's seen me kind of cite him in this context. One of the risks, or maybe the pleasures of a meeting like this, is that sometimes you might find your quotes sort of, up on a PowerPoint slide. So James described this as quite childish, misguided, disproportionate. This was on the BBC website. Adam Smith, I think, is here. I've not met him yet, but also was fairly critical, I think, in one of the blogs that he wrote about this. Factions are probably not the future of science. But maybe one of the questions we might raise over the course of the program is this kind of activity is important. This kind of activism, if you like, on the part of scientists is quite important for making visible these different perspectives. And maybe it's not always appropriate for scientists to speak as a single community, as a single homogeneous scientific community. And maybe some of these conflicts are quite important in a healthy democracy to actually have more discussion about. So my next example is very different. This is from the group called Biofuel Watch, and this comes actually from another project I'm involved in on biofuels. And one of the interesting things about this group, very much a kind of a pressure group, a group that's critical of the applications of biofuels, but also talking about the potential ways in which scientific research into so-called advanced biofuels might actually be taken up in the future, in practice. In commercial practice, and how this kind of practice might be quite different from what's intended at a research level. So very kind of important and interesting kind of sort of questions, I guess, raised here about the difference between how we might judge science in a kind of laboratory context and how it might actually be taken up very often with commercial incentives at stake, and how the kind of trajectory of these technologies might be quite different when it's actually implemented. So a question that's being asked here about translation. And then my final example, and I'll stop. And this, I wanted to also highlight one of the projects that actually Hobson-West is leading, which is looking at the interaction between animal rights organizations in relation to a piece of policy legislation. But the example that I want to draw from this is a response that the Haddon Trust put forward in a reply to a very famous speech that the former Prime Minister made called Science Matters. So in response to Blair's speech, one of the interesting things you find here is people, this pressure group, raising questions about the extent to which scientific standards are themselves being met in the course of research that uses animals. So at the bottom here, one of their spokespeople says, Tony Blair is sadly misguided if he believes that by defending animal experiments, he's promoting the best of British science. So the Blair speech was very much talked about as a big defense of the scientific establishment. Of scientific research and the importance of scientific freedom. And one of the things that a group like this is talking about is that there are actually other ways in which one could do science. How reliable are the results that one gets from animal models, for example, if you're looking at the impact of the safety of pesticides or whatever. How reliable are those? So they're asking questions about the content of science, or of the assumptions embedded in scientific knowledge itself, in a way that's quite different from perhaps some of the examples that Warren gave this morning. So what we want to try and do in the program is to try and capture this kind of diversity, this multiplicity of different ways in which one can look at making science public, not just from above, but also from below. Thank you.
thank you very much, Sujatha. Thanks very much, everyone. I think that's a masterclass for everyone else in how to stick to time. So thank you very much. We've got a lot of time, well, about 25 minutes for questions and comments. I think the panel, I hope I'm right in saying this, they're happy to answer kind of direct questions about what they've said or their background, but also more general questions about how these kind of ideas link to the broader programme, some of the things Sujatha was commenting on. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Is this working? Anyway, so I think what I wanted to ask was, I think at the minute there seems to be a lot of push for outreach and scientists to go out to the public. When I think back to some of my undergraduate lecturers, a lot of scientists are awful at presenting. And I do wonder if sometimes it might have the opposite effect than is intended. And a friend of mine the other day was commenting that, oh, Eddie Izzard, what's he doing presenting a natural history programme on the TV? What happened to the scientists doing it? But, you know, I pointed out to her that David Attenborough isn't a scientist. And so I just wonder to what extent you guys think it matters if it's actually a scientist promoting science.
Yeah, start.
Awesome. Yeah, not necessarily everyone should do outreach. It's one of the things that when I started my job, I was adamant that I wasn't going to force everyone in chemistry to do it. You wouldn't even ask them to babysit, let alone go out to schools. So the deal is that you obviously want people to do the engagement. Sorry, what?
Could you speak a bit slower? Can I just ask, are the microphones working?
Okay.
The mics on?
Press your buttons. Yes.
They are. Okay, thank you.
Is that working?
Oh, there, it's on now.
Is that? All right. Is that better? Okay. So yes, I wouldn't ask every person in the School of Chemistry to do outreach, because if their heart's not in doing it anyway, then that's going to come across, whether they're talking to a little kid or whether they're talking to someone, you know, at a public event. If the enthusiasm for it isn't there, then they shouldn't be doing the engagement. Having said that, you know, obviously the students and the staff who do go out, a lot of them will decide they want to do some training before they undertake any of that kind of event anyway. As for the presenter, yeah, I appreciate that if you're going on TV, a lot of the time they'll want someone who is a tried and trusted presenter, who's confident in front of the camera, who's able to speak eloquently, and although it won't necessarily be their field, it's something they're skilled at doing that, because they'll have a crib sheet and they'll be briefed on what to do and they'll have a script. Having said that, I think if you look at the science programmes that are on TV, generally the presenters will have a science, if not necessarily, you know, you will get a physicist presenting a zoological or biological programme, for instance, but then that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, it's just something that they're skilled at doing.
Brady, would you like to?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. For the kind of work I do, I couldn't imagine using Eddie Izzard or someone, because I like things to be quite natural and spontaneous and more of an interview and a conversation. Obviously, if you're good at delivering a script that has been written and checked by a scientist, that's not a problem. But if then you have some precocious Australian sitting opposite you who then asks you a question you weren't expecting, you need to have expertise in the area to answer it. So for that reason, I will always work with scientists. And I think before we all get very excited about Brian Cox and David Attenborough, who are all amazing and make excellent television programs, I was looking at the ratings from this morning and I saw that The Wonders of Life was watched 2 million times last night, and people think that's excellent. That program cost a lot of money to make, and I've made videos with people in this room and other people that have taken me 2 or 3 hours to make that have been watched the same number of times and cost a few £100s to make. So I think we're going to see a change in how people realise they engage with the public, and they're going to realise they don't need to do it through an incredibly expensive show that's watched by not that many people on TV, when for a lot less money and in a lot more honest way, and with sometimes a lot better, more detailed content, they can reach just a bigger audience.
Right, Richard.
Are there reputational risks around public engagement with research? Yeah. I think I would think about it in terms of the different skills that the researcher brings. Not everybody does this well, but that doesn't mean you don't have skills in other ways. So it's about thinking about, okay, who do researchers connect with? Who are their publics? Okay, is the first thing. And once you get people in a group, in a room, or in some kind of an online space, where they connect with people who care about the research, that makes a real difference. And then it's about thinking about the different ways that you engage. So you don't have to sit in front of a camera, although that can be useful. You don't have to stand in front of school children, but that can be useful. There are different ways to engage. It's about finding the ways that make sense to the researcher. And also I think people are increasingly looking at this in terms of research teams. Okay, so who's got the skills in this particular way, who's got the skills in that particular way, and actually just matching them up. So there are different ways of doing it, but the clear thing is that in terms of the bigger picture, of which public engagement sits within it, research impact is not going to go away as far as we can see. So people are going to have to get better at this. So you've got to plan as well. Planning is crucial.
I think what I'd add to that is what's the purpose of outreach? And it's probably worth keeping in mind that if you do outreach as a scientist, you might have a certain view of what you are going to be doing and what you expect the audience to be asking you, which might be about clarifying your, the content of what you're saying. But it may be that, people want, depending on exactly what you're talking about. I mean, just to give an example on biofuels. So if you are doing research that is quite basic research, but might have implications for practical applications. And if you talk about that as a scientist, you might be, we're probably bound to be these days, ask questions about, what actually does go on, how straightforward is it for this work to be translated from what you do in your lab to, what happens in companies and in government policy and so forth. Are there other priorities that people should have in doing this kind of research? So I think one of the things maybe to keep in mind if you did want to do outreach as a scientist is that the kind of space of public outreach and public engagement is quite fluid, or it's changing quite a lot. So, it's the range of questions that one might engage with are quite varied.